Hi there, how's it going? Recently we've been working with the idea of pressure. This is something we ran through at our autumn camp last weekend. It's something I'm going to be going into in more detail on my upcoming workshops in France, courtesy of Systema and Systema. And also, of course, we've been doing that at our regular sessions here, which are filmed and available on the member channel. And if you want to get details of how to access that instructional content, then just click the join button below. Pressure is something that we all live with throughout our lives. Physical pressure and psychological pressure. We live under the constant pressure of gravity, of course, except in very rare circumstances. And we live under all manner of psychological pressures, except perhaps at the very start and the very end of our lives. But the rest of the time we're dealing with all these different things. Have we got enough money? Have we got enough food? Or really important issues like someone said something nasty about me on Facebook. I'll be returning to that later on. But in terms of Systema, we thought, how do we look at dealing with this pressure, both physical and psychological? And the way in, or what we started to do, is exercising with the stick. A particular exercise is that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. There's two parts to it initially. You place the stick on the shoulder, person holds the stick, places one end on your shoulder, and you have to move the stick from this shoulder to that shoulder without breaking contact. You work shoulder, elbow, hip, knee and ankle, and then back up again. So it's a very good exercise for mobility, for getting the body loosened up. Stage 2 is where the stick remains in place, that remains fixed in place, and now you have to move around the stick. And again, you go shoulder to shoulder, down the body and up again, that exact same progression. So that's the basic drill. But one of the great things with the system is you can take what's quite a straightforward drill, which at first glance looks like just a mobility drill really, and you can start adding all these other layers in. So our thinking was, when the stick is even just resting on you, there is a certain amount of pressure. There's a certain unit of pressure. If I move, that pressure is likely to change. It might increase if I push back against the stick. It might decrease if I move away from the stick. So in order to develop a better sensitivity to this pressure, we ran that drill again. But now you're moving around the stick, but you have to maintain that same level of pressure in your contact. So if I'm moving from here to here and I sort of bump the stick up like this, I nudge it with my head, the pressure is changing and my partner can feel that through the other end of the stick. They can let me know. So the drill now is to do that same movement side to side without changing the pressure on the stick. This does a couple of things for us. One, of course, it's increasing our mobility, because rather than working these big movements, you know, rotating the joints and all that, which is fine, I'm working on a much smaller scale now in order to sort of fine-tune my movement. And of course, I'm developing that sensitivity and tactile awareness of pressure. Not only the pressure coming in, but also, just as importantly, what pressure am I giving back? Because that pressure is information. How much information about my movement am I giving to the person holding the stick? If you're used to this exercise and you've done it a few times, you're quite familiar with it, then working shoulder to shoulder and even elbow to elbow under that new condition is not too bad. You can get that pretty quickly. But of course, as you go down lower, hips, knees and ankles, that becomes a much greater challenge, because typically these areas of the body in some ways are less sensitive. We're using our arms and hands and shoulders all the time, you know, so to put that same amount of sensitivity into the hips and legs is quite a challenge, but one that is well worth doing. So that was our way of getting into this work. The second stage involved using a knife. Now we come into physical and psychological pressure, because a stick, when it's being held on your shoulder, doesn't feel particularly threatening. Even the appearance of a knife, of course, might elicit a little spike in your nervous system. This is why we recommend training with metal knives where possible for this kind of work. obviously taking all the safety factors into consideration. But what we do here is now your partner touches you with the knife and just applies a little pressure, just a little pressure. You feel that, and the first thing you need to do to respond to that pressure is calm the nervous system. Now, the interesting thing with this work is we can apply the same thing physically, but there's a huge difference psychologically. If the knife is placed here and pushed in, it's not particularly comfortable, but it's okay. If the knife is placed here and pushed in, oh, there's a distinct reaction to that. So another aspect of this work, if we're working on the psychological, is to feel that pressure coming in, and it's just maintained. I have to change that natural fear reaction, which in most cases means going into freeze. I have to change that to a response that I control. So as that touches and the pressure comes in, I work to calm my nervous system. And as we have said, you know, in some places that's more challenging than others, because even here doing it to myself, there's a natural movement away. But I keep that amount of pressure even, and I work to relax the nervous system. In effect, I'm accepting that pressure, but I'm not letting it affect my mental state, my mental equilibrium. Following that, we add in some movement. So now the knife is held, the point is pushed in a little. If the knife holder moves forward, I move back. If the knife holder moves back, I move forward. I'm basically keeping that amount of pressure very even and very steady. Now, of course, this can be very simple backward and forward movement at first. You can get more elaborate in that as you go along. You can, you know, change direction. You can work different levels. You can move up and down, all that kind of stuff. So again, even quite a simple exercise can become quite involved and challenging to do. But it's important you work through each stage of this process as you go along, because where you work through these stages is where you develop your attributes. And this is, of course, where Systema comes into criticism in some quarters, because people will see this exercise, someone standing there holding the knife against the other. Why would you ever do that in a fight? Well, you don't, any more than a boxer takes a skipping rope into the ring with them. But this is to develop attributes that you're going to put into your work later on. So we've got the pressure, we've got the movement, we're working on that feeling now of being able to control to some extent, or at least respond to the amount of pressure from the knife, both physical and psychological. From here we can start to work into our knife disarms. And this is where this idea of communication becomes very important, because if the knife is being held here, I'm being threatened with the knife, and I give a lot of sort of fast jerky movement like this, that's a big clue to the other person that something's going to happen. And it might be that a sudden movement will even make him jump. He might not even mean to cut me, but if I make him jump, that knife's going God knows where. So it's a way also of making our movements smooth in order to cut down on the amount of information we're giving to a potential attacker. This should then mean that I can take the knife quite smoothly, because there's no awareness of what is going to happen. And of course you can start off slow, but you can build up quite a lot of speed in this practice as well. In fact, after a certain time, you should be able to take the knife very easily. Again, this is not replicating the totality of that situation, but it's a way to build the attributes that we will put in to our later work. Of course, you start working with people as well. You can have a partner come in and apply some sort of grab, one hand or two hand. And the first thing is you learn to move to keep the pressure of that grab even. In effect, you're redirecting the person, but they shouldn't really feel it. When a person grabs and they make contact, they think they've got you. They continue to apply their work. If I escape or change or push back, then they are going to change their direction most of the time, particularly if they're skilled. So this is where we get into the idea of giving people support for our movement. Once they've got that support, we give them a direction, or we follow the direction they're going. We might subtly redirect it, but without changing that pressure. Then, of course, you can remove the support, or you can manipulate the person in such a way to break their structure. Now again, there's various levels of this. You can start one-on-one, you can work into some very nice flow work, grab and escape with this type of concept, all the way up to people giving you a full-on grab. You let the grab take hold and then you start working within that. But each time we're keeping that principle running through. I'm trying not to change the amount of pressure, the amount of information I'm giving my partner until it's too late, until I've subtly altered his structure, until I've led him into that empty space, and so on. And of course it should go without saying that all this work is applied to impact as well. If we're taking strikes, of course we're looking there not so much to keep the amount of pressure even, but to disperse it in some way, to absorb it, to bounce it back, whatever. So that's another aspect of this pressure work, but a slightly different area. That's something that people have asked about recently, so maybe next time I'll take a more in-depth look at how we take strikes. Anyway, this is all still mostly physical. There is a big psychological element, of course, because this is the thing in training, although we separate things out. So we do breath work, we do mobility work, we do tension work, we do work on pressure. All these things all work together. You only ever separate them out for convenience. So you can't really separate the physical and the psychological. Having said that, you can apply psychological pressure in order to teach people how to control their fear, how to deal with stress, all those other internal pressures, if you like. Now, there's a number of ways we can do this, and as I've said many times in the past, these are things we don't show on YouTube because they're deeply personal to the people involved, and also it's better if you come in for a lot of them having no idea what is going to happen to you, because, you know, fear of the unknown is one of the biggest fears of all. But there are a lot of ways you can do it. I mean, a simple example, one of the simplest I can think of, if you're in the right environment, is you just have people put blindfolds on. Straight away, the physical situation hasn't changed. You know, there's still the same tables and chairs and walls or wherever you're working, but suddenly that psychological pressure really increases because people are deprived of sight. So you have to teach people how to deal with that, which of course largely comes back to our breathing and again how we regulate our own nervous system. Finally, of course, we can talk about pressure in terms of pressure testing as well. We're building all these attributes and all these cool skills and we can do all these things. How do we know that any of it is going to work under real life? Well, to some extent you can't, because real is real and training is training. Having said that, we can, to a certain extent, replicate reality in terms of creating pressure. So we think of the different factors we have in a situation or in an exercise or drill. We can think about speed, we can think about levels of contact, we can think about working with more than one person, we can think about giving someone a specific goal to achieve and limit the time. We can think about depriving the eyesight or restricting the movement in some way. Each of these things, or these things combined, will increase pressure. Now, how you do that again is up to you. It's something I've spoken about a lot in our sparring videos and all the rest of it. There's some ideas there, but on a basic level, again, just think about that. If you want to put someone under pressure to see how good their movement is, then you probably up the speed. So you might take a light stick and you start working faster with them. That's going to give them the little boost to the nervous system, if you like. It suddenly becomes more real, the pressure increases, and you see how well they move. If they don't move so well, they're getting hit a lot, of course, you dial it back down. There's sometimes a sort of idea in martial arts, particularly with taking strikes, that what you have to do is you have to tough it out. You've got to be tough. You've got to be tougher than what's happening to you. It's all right, but it's quite a short-term thing and can lead to a lot of long-term problems. Much better that you give people the tools to deal with the stress, and again, that's physical or psychological stress, a whole big subject in itself. You give the people the tools to deal with that there and then. It's not about being tougher sometimes, it's about accepting what's happening and dealing with it physically and emotionally. there's some ideas on pressure then. That's what we've been doing lately, and we're going to continue to do that and develop these ideas. And again, this is one of the strengths of Systema to me, is I don't have a set syllabus to teach. I don't have to tick boxes at certain stages in people's training. You can find something, an idea or concept, you can start exploring it. That leads you down little rabbit holes into other areas. And of course, the great thing is with this method, you get feedback, direct feedback from the people you're training, the people you're working with. And it's very easy to tweak these things as you go along to make them more challenging or less challenging, whatever it needs to be. And of course, you never lose sight of the fact that, as I keep saying, this is attribute work that you then bring into your final training, if that is what you're training for. If you're training for particular types of self-defense, and again, that's a broad sort of subject in itself, then you also have to train putting those aspects into those situations. The other important thing though is doing all this work without even thinking about self-defense really does help, you know, the old cliche, healthy body, healthy mind. So all this work is very good for both physical and mental health as well, which in turn helps us deal with a lot of those stresses and pressures that I mentioned earlier. Speaking of which, I'll just finish on the latest social media shenanigans, because people did ask after my last upload last month about the YouTube thing. Well, no, Mr. Garbage never got back in touch. They rarely do. Of course, there's a few new Mr. Garbages that have popped up pretty much in the same mould. And I did have one other quite strange experience where a person friended me on Facebook, sent me the friend request. So, okay. Then started to tell me I was doing everything wrong, or most of what I was doing was wrong, and our training isn't tough enough. His training is much tougher than ours. And okay, great, that's fine. But then started throwing out sort of insults on various groups and misinformation, insults that, well, they went up to, let's say, C-word level, right? You know, okay. But the funny thing for me was when I corrected him on a factual point, he said something like, oh, there's no need to get personal about it, and promptly blocked me. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. You know, it's the wacky world of social media again. It's another form of pressure, I suppose. You have to learn to just roll with these things and accept them for what they are, really. Anyway, that's all by the by. Minor issue, doesn't affect our training in any way, shape or form, which is the main thing, right? Thanks for watching. I hope there's some useful tips there. As always, please do send in any comments, questions or suggestions. Sensible ones, please. And do remember to click that join button below for details on getting access to our member channel and all our latest instructional content. Take care. I'll see you soon.